Well, most people agree that shelters are necessary. We do live in a province where it's winter for 6 months of the year, and shelters can be the difference between life and death. What people don't always agree on is with where they should go. Conversations are happening in neighborhoods in Regina, Saskatchewan, Prince Albert, and across Canada and North America. Can you have real concerns about how a shelter will affect your neighborhood without being called a NIMBY? Today we're talking to people who are in the thick of this work, from both the service provider and the concerned neighbors. As always, we welcome your thoughts. Join the conversation by calling 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. It took years of planning and building to open the new $70 million YWCA building in Regina's Cathedral neighborhood. It offers a safe haven for women and children, wraparound supports, and outreach services. But since its opening in November, it's been the target of criticism from some who live nearby. The CBC's Jenny Whitfield spoke to Morning Edition host Adam Hunter about what she's learned.
It's a beautiful building. It's light-filled. It's sunny, obviously brand new still. It's got a coffee shop and a little secondhand store. They've got daycare in there, childcare center, outreach services, and of course shelter spaces for women and children fleeing domestic violence. And those are both emergency and transitional spaces. And we know that's important so that women don't just leave an emergency shelter and are left without a home or contemplating going back to an unstable situation. And while I was visiting the YWCA, I met Liza Channel, who was leaving what she called a bad situation in January, and she called a number of shelters before she connected with the YWCA.
They help with everything. They found me housing. When I got here, I had nothing. And the Encore clothing store, I've gotten clothes there. They give you a family or a clothing allowance. They took care of me when I couldn't take care of myself. Like when I first got here, I couldn't process. I couldn't read. I couldn't. I was terrified of everything. I was able to. The workers read my emails to me. They help me be able to keep up on things, and all of those small successes help you feel capable again.
And as you mentioned, it was a major project, $70 million that was covered by the city, the province, and the federal government. But even before that facility opened, there were concerns about what that site location might mean for the residents.
So explain that. What do you mean by that?
Well, the YWCA was previously offering those services downtown, and there were Cathedral residents that expressed concern that the things they observed outside of that YWCA location, people hanging out, people without homes sleeping outside or in the area, or intoxicated, using drugs, that these might be issues that were brought to their residential neighborhood. So before that facility did open, there were meetings that the neighborhood association hosted to address those concerns. And now, 10 months down the road, the neighbors say the things they were worried about happening in their neighborhood are now happening. And I stopped by on a weekday evening earlier this summer, and I stopped by to chat to a group of about 10 neighbors who were gathered on a stoop, and I wanted to understand their concerns, what were they seeing. And they expressed support for the YWCA's mission and cause, but they also shared a few of the reasons why they're frustrated.
Since the YWCA's gone up, probably the drugs being left around. I just found one 2 doors down from my house here, a spoonful of some blue substance and used needle, and it was either meth or something that we found out called blue heroin, which is heroin and fentanyl. I called the police. They did not respond. One of the neighbors from several doors down came with some oven mitts and a bag and disposed of it the best way he thought possible.
So we're being threatened. There's people smoking crack, smoking meth in front of our properties. Families can't get inside. Kids are scared when they're asked to move. Weapons are being pulled out. They're allowing people to wave weapons around on their property all night long. They're allowing intoxicated people to yell and scream all night long. They're allowing fights to happen outside. They're allowing bathroom usage outside. It's happening on our properties. There's fires being started. The fire department was called out. Kids are scared to sleep at night. And I let a lot of things slide because I don't want to use up services that are needed. And the police are quick to respond usually. They're really good. Prior to the Y moving in here, never. Not once in 10 years did I call the police ever.
Well, there's this one specific resident who would stand out the resident doors, and she'd yell and scream and swear. And I have my own mental health issues. I deal with PTSD and anxiety. And so she was, like, the yelling and screaming was really setting me off. And so, like, we'd call over there and, like, ask them, please, can you go and talk to her? Like, can you do something about this? And it was every day for a while. It was multiple times a day for a while. And, they'd say, like, oh, she's not violent. It's like, it doesn't matter that she's not physically violent. She's, like, causing me real distress. The cathedral area was always a safe, nice neighborhood. It was the specific reason why I wanted to buy a house here, was because I loved the cathedral area. And now this area is not what it was even just a few years ago.
So you can hear, Adam, there's a lot of different things that
Frustration,
they're
right? Yeah.
Right. That's, I think, the main emotion you might take away from that. And one of the things I heard from them as part of that frustration is that they feel they can't express what they're thinking or feeling openly, that they're just being dismissed as NIMBY. And you've heard that acronym that stands for Not in My Backyard. And they say, yeah, okay, well, I don't want some of these things in my background. There are people that use the Y services that have complex needs and issues, and some of that is definitely spilling over to the area. Is seen that they mentioned in the area, and that they don't want to see some of that issues, and that they feel like that there are other neighbors who are dismissing them like that. If you go on the Regina Cathedral Neighborhood Facebook page, there's a lot of back and forth from people who are saying you need to be more compassionate. These are people with issues and needs. They're like, that's fine. We understand that. We understand they have needs, but nobody is hearing us, and they feel like that they are not being heard by the leadership at the YWCA either.
So what was your sense of how safe the neighborhood felt when you were walking around there?
When I was there, it was a fairly quiet weekend evening. There were these neighbors gathered on one stoop, and right outside the YWCA, there were people gathered who were just sitting and talking. And I said to the neighbors, it seems pretty peaceful. And they told me, oh, it's not always like this. And then just moments later, someone across the street did sit down and start smoking from a pipe. I don't know what they were smoking, but they were, it was one of the issues that they had flagged. And then these neighbors showed me videos and photos of things like people fighting, and a woman who was using something that appeared to be a crack pipe. And I was really curious to talk to the people who are drawn to that location specifically because of the YWCA. So when I saw a woman walking down the street who exchanged greetings with the people on the benches at the YWCA, I ran down to talk to her. Her name is Gina Bernard, and she said she regularly uses the YWCA for outreach and counseling. She told me she's had past addiction issues, and she still lives in the area. So she is a supporter of the YWCA's cause, but she also understands where the neighbors are coming from.
Trauma is the gateway to using drugs to escape, or alcohol, right? I used to use alcohol to escape. So, we don't make sense when we're in active addiction. So, of course, it's going to disrupt the peace of the community, or they might not be used to what's going on. So I can understand both sides.
So that's an interesting perspective as well, Jenny. We're waiting to hear from one other group in this, and that's the YWCA.
Absolutely.
So what have they said?
Yeah, I did sit down with CEO Melissa Coomer-Betson, and she acknowledges there have been some new issues that have cropped up with the new building. Of course, before it even opened, there were months and months of construction, and that was fairly noisy for the people living there. And then there have been fire alarms going out while they work out bugs from that new facility. While I was there was a fire alarm that kind of went off, and sometimes that happens in the night or early morning. And there's a lack of parking for residents at times as well when they've got activities and things going on. She says she understands those issues would be frustrating for residents, but she said she also used to live in that general area beforehand, before the Y even opened there, and she has seen how drugs and mental health issues have long been issues even before they located there.
I think a lot of people fear what they don't understand or they don't know. And so gathering of people who potentially may not look like them, who may not, who may have, all of their belongings in a shopping cart, who may, not necessarily behave in a way that assumes one behaves when they're sitting on a park bench. I think there's a lot of fear in that unknown piece. And so sometimes it's really difficult to determine, is this fear or is this actual danger?
One of the things she feels the YWCA has been able to give to the neighborhood is a better understanding of people that are facing trauma. You heard one of the people earlier, one of the neighborhood residents talking about somebody who's having a mental health crisis outside. Well, Melissa gave me that as an example of this resident who sometimes has crisis and can behave erratically. And some neighbors, she said, came and said, well, what's going on with this? How do we help? And the staff told them to say this woman's name, which can help break her out of that crisis moment.
With knowledge comes a sense of connection. I think that I've seen many examples of that over the last 9 months that our women have lived here. And I think that those are the beautiful moments of being able to be part of a neighborhood.
So we have a couple of very different perspectives here that you've shown us. Do you have a sense of how these neighbors' concerns may be resolved? Is there any get-together in the future?
Yeah, it's clearly not easy. I think that everybody has a different perspective here. And I think everyone I spoke to agrees that we need addiction and mental health services and shelter services in our city and, across probably the country. And where to deliver those services, we've seen it. It's always a source of contention, or can generally be a questions around that. But in the interest of bringing together people to figure out how to create a safer and healthier neighborhood, that is work that's ongoing. The local community association has plans to host a meeting, and they want to bring together the YWCA and some of those concerned neighbors to figure out how they may work collectively to that cause. And I'm sure we will be bringing you the details of exactly when and where that will be happening to our airwaves soon.
That is the CBC's Jenny Whitfield. She's our CBC community engagement producer, and she was talking there with Morning Edition host Adam Hunter. Those concerns raised by some of the neighbors of the YWCA in Regina are not unique to Regina's Cathedral neighborhood. Those same conversations are happening across this province and country. And that's why we want you to call today, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Do you feel like you can be open about concerns? Is the conversation productive? We'd like to hear about it. This is happening right now in Caswell Hill. That's a neighborhood in Saskatoon. There's a new 60-bed emergency shelter planned for the Central Industrial District, which is across the street from the neighborhood. And the community association is being proactive with their concerns. They've written a letter outlining some of the things they'd like to see happen. Ty Johnston is the communication coordinator with the Caswell Hill Community Association, and he's with me here in our Saskatoon studio. Hi, Ty.
Hi, how are you?
We heard how tough it is in Regina, and I kind of just want to put this out there. Like, do you feel like you can be open and honest and have a productive conversation? Has this been difficult to navigate?
At the start, it was just kind of dropped on us. And so we had those initial fears that I think everyone has. You kind of go through a range of emotions of fear and also empathy for these folks. But we put together our kind of concerns,
Some of the concerns and
some of our concerns into a letter, and kind of broke it down into bullet points into not necessarily saying that this isn't the right location, but kind of we felt as if our position should be, if this is going to go forward, here's how it can work positively. And I'm happy to say that so far the city and Mustard Seed, who's going to be the operator, have responded positively to essentially everything that we put together in our letter. So far it feels better, and I hope that we're not on the same path of some of the folks that we just heard speaking earlier.
Yeah, well, let's give people maybe a bit more context. So you felt, or people felt like it was dropped on them a bit. Can you just back up and tell us how you found out there was going to be this new shelter near you?
So we as a community association, we got 2 days heads up before this information went to the public. So we didn't have a lot of time to respond. Also, it came during the summer. Everyone's busy. And we are a volunteer organization, so we don't have people on standby even watching their email necessarily. But then we were made aware of it, and then it kind of just goes into that flurry of conversations between people in their homes, and then that spills over onto Facebook. And then I've spent a lot of time on the phone talking to people, talking face-to-face with a lot of people in the neighborhood. And so we had to kind of quickly move and say, how do we respond to this? How do we imagine this working positively?
How did you feel about it?
The way that it was initially kind of just dropped on us, it felt like we had the way that it was worded honestly made me feel like it had already been decided. Is that like, this is what's going to happen? Because I kind of get a sense, I can't speak, and I don't know if this is the truth, but we've seen other shelters be proposed, and you're kind of asking, which neighborhood wants a shelter? And none of them do. So I kind of, that's what I imagine happened, is that the government was just saying, this is what's happening, here's where it is. And then they were just going to deal with the feedback at that point.
So how have you dealt with some of the concerns? Actually, maybe start by telling me what are the concerns? So people find out this is coming. What do they say?
Those who are concerned first, so there is a rule about the proximity between a shelter and a school, which is why one of the proposed shelters in Saskatoon was moved. This shelter is now going to be 50 meters or 100 meters beyond that, and there's actually 2 schools. And so when you step out of this proposed shelter, behind you is the shelter, to the right is the train tracks, in front of you is a school, 300 meters, to the left of you is a convalescent home, about 200 meters, and then another 50 meters that way is a second school. And right across from you this whole time is the planned Harry Bailey reopening of the Harry Bailey Aquatic Center. So it's easy to imagine people interacting with folks who are vulnerable and using these shelters.
Right. So how have you engaged in conversations with residents? Tell me about that.
It's kind of been quick and fast and ongoing ever since that they announced this. We've kind of made a concerted effort to invite people to our community association meetings, to send us emails. Like I said, I've spoken on the phone with a lot of folks. One thing that we've found, for better or for worse, I kind of hold a policy of not getting into it on Facebook. I feel like that's not the spot. You can say an absolutely valid thing on Facebook, but it's not where good conversations happen. So we just try to say, like, if you are really this passionate about writing out a sentence, let's see you send an email and let's get in back and forth. Let's go sit down. Let's go walk around the neighborhood. Let's talk about it. But all these fears are valid, and I think like all the stories we just heard are just more fuel for that, and I don't want to downplay them when we're talking about how does this work positively. They're completely valid concerns.
Yeah. If they are valid, but on the other side, we know how important it is to have a shelter. How are you even scoring that in your own mind? Do you see the importance of a space like this?
Yeah, I think everyone can agree. Like I mentioned, it's kind of a mixed emotions thing. Even from some members of the community are on one side and some are on the other. But most people I speak to have both inside of them. They're mixed on this, and I think everyone kind of agrees that a shelter is a Band-Aid. And we can talk about where the Band-Aid goes and how big it is and when do we rip it off. But the end of these conversations with these folks, I think a lot of them, and myself, this might sound calloused, I wish we didn't have a shelter in our neighborhood, because I wish that we didn't have any shelters. I wish that there was more long-term planning. And so if we're going to spend money, time, resources, and strain the community possibly, I want to see that. What do we need to do to make sure this isn't happening again in the future? I don't I would. It kind of upsets me a little bit to think like, oh, we're getting really good at dealing with shelters in our neighborhood now. I don't really want my children, obviously, to be in a shelter, but I don't want them 30 years from now to be having these same conversations. I want the long-term solution so that no one's in a shelter.
Yeah. What are you seeing in your neighborhood already, and maybe even beyond your neighborhood? Are you seeing encampments? Are you seeing the need? Is it already present, whether or not there's a shelter in Caswell or near Caswell? Are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. Not as bad as some neighborhoods, not as good as some neighborhoods. I think everywhere you go, this isn't kind of unique. I've had the privilege of traveling through a lot of places in Canada. This is everywhere. This is the new bottom. Like the poorest, most vulnerable people are more poor and more vulnerable than ever. So yeah, we are seeing some signs in the neighborhood. Our neighborhood historically has been bad, rough, sketchy, and I've really seen it blossom and bloom in the last few years. And a lot of folks are like, "Oh my God, we just got good again," and it feels like we're kind of being penalized. And also, I think that I will say, the people of Caswell, in my opinion, from the folks that I interact with, I feel like they do have a lot of like love, and we think that like love grows in our neighborhood. But it's got to be love for the people who are housed and unhoused at the same time.
I'm Leisha Grabinski. This is Blue Sky. Let's go to a caller. Loretta is on the line in Saskatoon. Hi, Loretta.
Hi.
What are your thoughts?
As someone who once used a safe shelter, I can appreciate the terror, the need for immediate support, the need for security and protection, and the trauma of that entire process as someone who has fled violence. I can also appreciate when you take that from the individual to a community, the community is experiencing that very same oppressive hand by a higher entity. This is very systematic. So the two other points that are related are, that was a long time ago for me. And this province has had the highest rate of domestic violence per capita for over 2 decades. We're not solving the problem. We're simply shifting it around wherever the class location allows it. In Saskatchewan, there's a disproportionate amount of violence that happen in certain areas and a disproportionate placement of where the shelters are. They're not going to Briarwood or the East Side or Brighton, or they're just simply staying where it's convenient for the government, for the powers that be. So there needs to be more solution that pushes up toward where the systemic problem is, the continuing reactive, violence is happening more, so we have to put it here, instead of what is the structural problem going on here, and how can we resource these neighborhoods so that they can have all their needs met.
Loretta, thank you for calling.
Thank you.
It's Loretta in Saskatoon. Ty, I think this is kind of what you were getting at in your letter. You know, what are the resources, what are the supports your community is going to have when a place like this opens? Mm-hmm. And hearing Loretta say that, what in your letter might kind of reflect what she's getting at there? Yeah,
that's really well said, and that's kind of what I was alluding to is the long-term support. I think everyone in the community will have, honestly, more of an appetite for a short-term pain if we can see the long-term plan. And so we just want to see more investment into the things that prevent people getting into these situations. They're compound, they're complex. It's not easy, but it is something that can be solved and can be improved over time. So in the absence of all those efforts to stop long-term solutions, to have long-term solutions. Our letter is more focused on the relationship that we can have with the shelter in a positive way. A few things in there that I think are worth mentioning are like a good neighbor agreement. It sounds like some things like the YWCA would appreciate or would benefit from having a good neighbor agreement, which is basically a non-legally binding agreement that outlines basically expectations from both parties, and it kind of outlines what happens when we have to escalate this thing, when somebody's yelling, when I see somebody smoking something, what do I do? As well as a community advisory board, so a place for representatives from each of the parties, so that the city, the province, the shelter, the community association, police, fire, all to come together and kind of just streamline those conversations. That's something that we're looking forward to.
And you do feel like you've been heard? You mentioned at the start that you've had a fairly good response from the city and from the Mustard Seed, who will run the shelter?
Yes, this is great timing. In the last 2 days, we've had responses, and essentially we outlined 9 items that we'd like to see, and between the two parties, they've all been addressed with the exception of a few things that the province has yet to respond to.
So what are your next steps other than waiting for a few more responses? There's a meeting coming up, right?
There's a meeting on Monday. We've decided that since we have received response from the Mustard Seed and the city, and to be honest, we've had conversations with them outside of these officially drafted letters. We are going to continue to attend that meeting that's on Monday. It's a public information session. It is stated on the letter that it says they are not taking feedback on the location. So I think a lot of people are orienting their perspectives onto how do we make this work positively. We're planning on simply attending and to listen and to not take up any space and to reiterate ourselves in front of everyone, but just to listen to more of our Caswellians who are concerned.
Okay, well, Ty, you can stick around because we have more interesting people who can comment on how difficult these conversations are, how we make them productive. So stick around, and if you want to chime in again, you just put up your hand, and I'll acknowledge you and include you in the conversation.
Thank you so much.
You've been hearing from Ty Johnston. He's the communications coordinator with the Caswell Hill Community Association. The City of Saskatoon, as he noted, is hosting this neighbourhood information session for residents of Caswell Hill, Monday, September 15th, 6:30 to 8:30 at the City Council Chamber. Residents can also participate virtually. The nonprofit group, the Mustard Seed, has been contracted to run the shelter, and they will be providing 24/7 shelter alongside wraparound supports to people without a home. We did contact the Mustard Seed to be part of this show today, but no one was available to join us over the noon hour today. Now, I would like to bring in a few more guests onto the show, and you can call us if you want to add your thoughts to this, 1-800-716-2221. You can also email bluesky@cbc.ca. Now, Brian Howell works with Reaching Home in Prince Albert, managing the federal homelessness money. He's been involved in developing shelters in Prince Albert and supportive housing in PA. Welcome to Blue Sky, Brian.
Oh, hi, good afternoon. I should point out that I retired about a year ago, so this is a bit reflective for me.
Okay. But so you're still working.
I'm out and about, yeah.
Out and about. Well, it's good to have you today, Brian. I know you've been at this a long time, so I appreciate your reflections looking back. Erin Day is an associate professor in the Department of Criminology at Wilfrid Laurier University. She's been doing research around homelessness for the past 15 years. She was involved in creating a documentary titled Bridging Divides, Voices and Visions About Homelessness in Mid-Sized Cities. Erin, welcome to Blue Sky.
Thank you. It's been wonderful to listen to the discussion so far.
Yeah, I want to ask you what you've been thinking about, because some of what you're hearing is likely very familiar and reflects the work that you do.
Very familiar. I've taken 3 pages of notes in the last bit because it's so rich. It's absolutely happening all over Canada. I've been doing this work from coast to coast, and communities across the country are feeling this. And what I'm really hearing from the opening clip was people not feeling heard, and what a difference it can make when people feel heard, when their concerns and fears are validated and addressed, and then moving proactively. So I am absolutely elated with what I'm hearing Ty say. This is what we need as we try to build a community. Not yes, but not in my backyard. Yes, but anywhere else. It's okay, if this is going to be in my backyard, how do we do this in a way that works for everybody? That's the right approach.
I think I want to ask you, though, the question that I said off the top, that can you express concerns without automatically being accused of NIMBYism? I think that was kind of the starting point. Like, okay, if people want to express their concerns, are they going to be accused of, well, you just don't want it in your backyard?
I think that's a reflection of what's actually been happening for, I would say the last decade, is there has been a lot of weaponizing of concerns like parking, like neighborhood aesthetics, things like that, as a way of pushing out any services that provide supports to unhoused people, no matter what. We call it banana. It's build absolutely nothing anywhere at any time. And so it's this idea that they'll do anything to make it not happen. And I imagine I think Ty was probably right, that why they probably received a notice 2 days in advance, only 2 days in advance, was because the years-long pushback that some places get when they try to build programming is because of this real upsurgence in refusing it at any and all ways. So I think that's what's happening. And so then there's an automatic reflex when what I think of as valid and legitimate concerns are addressed, it gets lumped into that, for lack of a better word, banana bucket.
So how can you address people's concerns in a way that has them feeling heard, but also doesn't? I'm just wondering what supports a community needs so that they aren't dealing with people smoking drugs across the street from the shelter. I mean, and cities are dealing with this in all neighborhoods. I'm not suggesting that it will only happen there, but what do you say to someone who's like, but I don't want that happening in my neighborhood?
And it's fair to not want it to happen in your neighborhood. The people who they're describing that they're worried about don't want it to happen either. Nobody wants to be out on the middle of the street having an episode. Nobody wants to be addicted to substances. And if they are using substances, nobody wants to use it out in public. Like it's there's a shame that comes with this. And I've met lots of folks who will say, I want to be a good neighbor. I know people in encampments who tidy up their encampment and try to do everything they can to be a good neighbor. And I know people who've been that person screaming in the middle of the street one day and the next day feeling incredibly embarrassed and incredibly ashamed. But it was the difficult moment they were in.
I wrote down a quote from someone in Jenny's story. We don't make sense when we're in active addiction. I wrote that down because I thought that was pretty poignant. Brian, I want to go to you. What are you thinking about as you're hearing these conversations?
Well, it's certainly been part of every shelter initiative that I've been involved with. I would agree with some of the previous speakers who suggested that, these things always seem to end up in the lower income neighborhoods. And, in the past, when we've even gotten close to a higher income neighborhood, we've just been met with such a blitz of anger and organizing and political action that we've been unable to get things done there. So my thoughts are that shelters are going to be built because the alternative is just not acceptable of people dying in the streets in the winter, and they are likely going to be imposed upon neighborhoods because that's the only way that they can get built. However, having said that, there are things that could and should be done. I really think that proponents, cities, provinces, police departments need to take some ownership of what is happening outside of the shelter. Okay, so, everyone's very concerned about what's going on inside, and they maintain order, and the police are involved if there's trouble. But it often seems that when people get outside, whatever happens. And I think that there needs to be a more constant policing so that if someone is having a screaming episode and needs help, that they're maybe taken to hospital right quickly. If, someone is doing drugs on the street, that there would be some kind of someone to approach them, whether it be a police officer, security guard, or whatever. But I think that would go a long way to helping to alleviate some of the concerns that people have, because when you see some of the shelters, it has definitely spilled out into the surrounding neighborhood, and it is difficult for people whose someone's home is their primary investment in the center of their life, and all of a sudden they wake up one morning and find that there's a shelter being placed a ways down the street, and they know that their life is going to change, somewhat, perhaps dramatically. And so I think we do need to help out with that a bit.
Brian, I'm wondering how much things have changed in the time that you had worked in this area. I'll give you an example. I was relatively familiar with a shelter in Saskatoon, And I lived fairly close by to it, actually, at the time. I don't anymore, and had no problem living next to it. But I think we all know just how different circumstances are now. The drugs are different. The numbers have increased. That shelter is completely different today, or the exterior of the shelter is different today than it was 10, 12 years ago. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to that it's becoming increasingly difficult, increasingly complex to support people, and how that might be shaping the conversation that we're having with community members now.
Sure. Well, there's been both, I guess I would say, qualitative and quantitative changes in the nature of homelessness. So for one thing, there's a lot more people who are homeless, and that's really around the world, but especially in these northern prairie cities, we're seeing a bit of a diaspora as people move from northern Saskatchewan down to the cities, and many of them fit in quite well and find employment and do great, whereas others, struggle with things from their lives and end up homelessness and within shelters. So there's that change. And then the drugs are much, I think, more serious, especially crystal meth does cause a lot of behavioral problems, it's and especially when it's mixed in with mental health, and fentanyl has had a severe impact on many people. The behavioral and the sort of medical changes that are occurring with people mean you're dealing with a far different population than you were, say, back in 2010 when we started. Back then it was often people who drank too much, or people who were involved with, drugs like pharmaceutical drugs like not Demerol or morphine or whatever, and now it's just moved really up a scale.
Erin, can you comment on that? Has the situation changed, and how is that shaping conversations now?
It absolutely has changed. I really agree with Brian. We know that the toxicity level of drugs has increased significantly, and that's part of the story. We also know that because there's a lack of housing, that chronic homelessness is increasing, which means people being homeless for 6 months or more. So people are becoming entrenched in homelessness because they can't find anywhere to move out to. There's no housing, there's no apartments for them to go to. And the longer you stay entrenched in homelessness, the more trauma you experience and the greater risk you are of, if you were not using substances before or just using them casually, the greater the risk that you're going to have an addiction problem because you are in this space. So I think that's part of the issue. The other thing I wanted to note is that who we see on the outside of the shelter isn't always reflective of who's inside the shelter. So we know that families are experiencing higher rates of homelessness. Older adults experiencing homelessness for the first time over the age of 50 because their pension no longer covers their rent are experiencing homelessness. Newcomers. So
and people fleeing domestic violence. I just want to point that out because
Absolutely.
that is the mandate of the YWCA, which is different than the shelter we're talking about in Saskatoon. So
absolutely. So part of what we see is when shelters come into a space and there is community pushback. Sometimes the community say, well, we want you to don't allow substance use, have all these rules. What that means is that people who are not eligible to go into the shelter then because of these strict rules are going to be outside the shelter because there's nowhere for them to go.
Ty, is that a concern that you have? That is it less about what's happening in the shelter and who's going to the shelter and more about those who can't get in?
I think the concerns are, from what I understand, the shelter that's being proposed, at least in our neighborhood, is not dry, meaning that you can be under the influence. You have to be under your own willpower, however, but you cannot use drugs. So now it's really easy to imagine a story. You choose to leave, and you need to go do drugs. And again, just because of the way that ours is set up, it's really easy to imagine where they're going to go, and it's to a bunch of vulnerable community members.
Erin, I want to play for people a clip from the trailer of a documentary that you did. You brought 5 people together from different backgrounds to really dig into these issues of safety and belonging. So let's listen.
They're not out to cause problems for anybody. They're simply trying to survive. And they are people just like you and I. And if you're that afraid, stay home. Don't walk your dog.
I think for someone to say that if you don't want to see homelessness, then just stay home. Don't go out for dinner, don't walk your dog. I think that's not really helping the situation because it's allowing those behaviors to continue.
You've got families coming to your restaurant and someone's sitting on your front doorstep and it's during, your operating hours and all of a sudden someone's sitting there and they can't be there, right? Because people aren't going to come into your store, where it's a fear of businesses, right, that they won't come into your store. So I think I have been bold and I'll say, I'm sorry, you got to go. You got to move along.
It's understanding everyone's point of view and how do we find a happy medium in the middle. Because I think regardless, it's going to be in someone's backyard, and we also want those people invested in this, because I don't want it to be a situation where people are feeling uncomfortable and unsafe in their own community either, because they are also community members. And a lot of it is breaking down the stigma and helping them understand.
What a range of opinions, Erin. And I've heard all of it here in Saskatoon or in other parts of the province. Been told don't run, don't run by yourself in the river or along the river. And I walked by a business yesterday and they had a sign up saying no loitering, and the day previous I saw someone sleeping there. So I get how complicated it is. What would you say was the most surprising thing that people learned by coming together to share, Erin?
What I think they would say, and what I would say as well, is how much they actually agreed with one another. So the clip that you played earlier and the phone call that you received, where somebody who's been the person who's homeless agrees, understands what the community is feeling. That's what we saw in that documentary. And likewise, in particular, that business owner who you heard, she runs a coffee shop and she has an enormous empathy for people who are homeless. She doesn't hate homeless people, but she has to run her coffee shop and trying to figure out the way to make that work. The tools that coffee shop owner has been given is trespass notices by the police. What that does, and we often see, is that anybody in a uniform often will trigger people. People will put their defenses up. And so one of the things that we recommend is neighborhood groups, outreach workers doing that first line of intervention rather than law enforcement, because just inevitably people are going to get their backs up against the wall when they see police coming, as opposed to an outreach worker that they know and they can say, hey, let's go for a walk and things like that.
We definitely have community support workers in Saskatoon, Regina as well. Brian, do you have that in Prince Albert?
Yes, we do have some programs that provide support, outreach.
Yeah.
And that's an important part of sort of dealing with things in a non-confrontational way, so that problems do get resolved. It also helps establish relationships. So homeless people develop relationships with the support workers, and then, they're able to say to them, it's maybe time to go get that foot checked out if you've been outside in the winter a lot and have diabetes, or, they can make interventions that are supportive. One brief comment I would like to make too, following up on what Erin said about the depth of chronic homelessness, and that's before I left, we were beginning to see more and more people who were just choosing to stay on the street. Like if there was a shelter bed available, they wouldn't take it, and that was going on in some awfully cold weather. So people have learned survival tricks, and now they're kind of outside of any contact with services, except maybe the hospital if they end up there. So that's very concerning too. It's a much longer journey, from there back to housing.
And Brian, when you think about the conversations, like the clip there from the documentary, I'm sure you've heard all those opinions before. What do you take away from kind of hearing them back to back like that and reflecting on your own experiences with hearing the pros and cons of a shelter?
Well, the pro to a shelter is that it, especially in our climate, without one. The reason we actually started a shelter in Prince Albert, the YWCA and a few others of us back in 2012 was because we had 5 people die in one winter, like 5 people in a community of 37,000, so shelters are absolutely necessary. I think, we tend to treat the homeless as if they're a separate group, almost from, the living dead or whatever, and we don't talk to them enough. I think if there was, and I've seen that change in the downtown areas, where again, the support workers are involved with conversations. I think it needs to go, it needs to continue on, maybe through community dinners and discussions with people about their behavior and how it affects others. I think you could have some impact that way and bring homeless people into the conversation about how to deal with some of the issues that they face and get their honest opinions about what would help them move on with their lives. Any communication, any conversation makes things better, I think.
Both Aaron and Ty are nodding right now. I want to know why you're nodding, Ty. It's obvious, but could you see yourself having conversations with people who have struggled to have stable housing?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think in all of the conversations that we've had with various parties that are involved in this, I don't think I've regretted any of the conversations. I think you always learn something and gain more perspective. So just more of that sounds great.
And Aaron, I want to give you the last few words. We might be able to get back to Brian again, but why were you nodding along as Brian was speaking there?
Because once you get to know people, once you get to know folks who are homeless, so much of that fear and that concern breaks away, because you're like, oh, this is the person I can talk hockey with, or just hang out with. It really does make a difference. And likewise, when people who are homeless feel connected to the community, boy, do they take care of it. But when they have a relationship, for example, with a business, they are loyal and they will make sure nothing happens to that business because they're good to them. They'll reciprocate. So the more you can build that, it actually works for everyone. What it takes, though, is patience. Moving people along, arresting people is a quick fix. It might do something for a few moments, for a few weeks, for a couple months, but it's always short-term and it always comes back. The long-term stuff that will actually work requires us housed people to have a lot of patience, but it's worth it in the end.
Brian, I'll give you the last word. I want you to talk directly to Ty, who's at the center of these conversations in his community right now. He's trying to bring people together. He's trying to listen and take those concerns forward. Brian, what last words would you share with Ty in that regard?
Well, I'd like to thank him for his approach, first of all. To tell you the truth, in my career, I've not met anyone from the community who has been so objective and responsible in his approach. I think, it's important to keep after the governments if they're not doing their part, if they're letting these streets, become a problem for you, let them know and, maybe get those outreach workers from somewhere to help out a bit, or, some security or whatever. You as a community have every right. We would enjoy your house and your home and your community and your neighborhood. And I think there's a way to do it and have a shelter there at the same time. It's just a matter of conversations and identifying problems and issues and getting them solved.
Great. Yeah, thank you. I should also reiterate, this is not just myself. There's a whole community association that is putting this together, and there's just a ton of folks in the neighborhood that have a lot of passion and a lot of them that care. And we've even noticed, like, even though you want to have a conversation with everyone, and sometimes people get upset, I just think that that's an extension of caring.
An extension of caring. That's a really nice way to leave things today. I'm so glad we got to do this. Thanks to all of you. I really appreciate it. You've been listening to Blue Sky here on CBC Radio 1. If you want to share your thoughts after listening today, feel free to email us anytime, bluesky@cbc.ca. This will also be posted on the CBC Listen app, so if you think there's someone in your life who needs to hear it, you can share it with them. Thanks for listening, and have a really great afternoon.